The easiest way to recognize a broken house is not by the silence. It is by the sound of everyone holding their breath. I did not accept the job because I was brave. I accepted it because the hospital bill folded inside my purse did not care whether I was afraid. My mother needed another surgery, and my savings had disappeared months earlier. When the employment agency called about a live-in housekeeping position at the Romano estate, the salary sounded too good to question. They only hesitated once before giving me the address. Then the woman on the phone sighed softly and said, "If you decide to leave after the first day, no one will blame you." I thought she was joking. She was not. The mansion overlooked the Hudson River, surrounded by iron gates, towering oak trees, and perfectly trimmed gardens that seemed untouched by time. It looked less like a home and more like a place where people forgot how to smile. I adjusted the strap of my worn travel bag, smoothed my simple blue housekeeping uniform, and took a slow breath before pressing the front doorbell. A gray-haired butler welcomed me with perfect manners, yet his tired eyes revealed years of quiet exhaustion. "Miss Carter," he said politely. "Welcome." Before I could thank him, another maid hurried past carrying a basket of fresh towels. She nearly collided with me before whispering, "If you hear shouting, stay out of the hallway." She did not stop walking. She did not smile. During orientation, I noticed something unusual. Every employee moved carefully, almost silently. The chef checked the dining room clock every few minutes. The gardeners watched the windows instead of the flowers. Even the security staff spoke in voices barely louder than the wind outside. Finally, I asked the housekeeper training me, "Why does everyone seem so nervous?" She paused long enough to glance toward the grand staircase. "Because Mr. Romano has not had a peaceful day in years." Before I could ask another question, a heavy door closed somewhere upstairs. No one flinched dramatically. They simply froze. Every conversation disappeared. Every movement stopped. The entire house seemed to wait for permission to breathe again. I looked toward the staircase, expecting someone terrifying to appear. Instead, I saw only the shadow of a tall man crossing the second-floor balcony before disappearing into another room. I could not even see his face. Yet somehow the weight of his presence settled over every corner of the mansion. The older maid beside me quietly crossed herself before returning to work. "Most people quit within a week," she murmured. "Some do not last until dinner." I looked around the beautiful estate, then down at the folded hospital invoice still tucked inside my apron pocket. Leaving was never an option for me. As the evening sun disappeared behind the river, a deep voice echoed from somewhere above, followed by another unsettling silence. Without thinking, I took one step toward the staircase while everyone else instinctively stepped away. I stopped halfway to the staircase when the butler quietly touched my arm. His grip was gentle, almost apologetic. "Miss Carter," he whispered, "please let Mr. Romano have a few minutes." I looked into his eyes and saw something I recognized immediately. It was not fear of punishment. It was the helpless exhaustion of someone who had spent too many years trying to keep another person from falling apart. I nodded and stepped back, but curiosity stayed exactly where it was. The rest of the evening unfolded like a carefully rehearsed performance. Dinner was prepared with perfect timing. Fresh flowers were arranged in crystal vases. Every room smelled faintly of cedarwood and polished oak. Yet no one laughed. No one spoke above a whisper. It was as if the mansion had forgotten what ordinary life sounded like. While setting the dining table, I noticed one place setting had already been prepared with remarkable attention to detail. The silverware reflected the warm light from the chandelier. A bowl of homemade tomato soup rested beside a perfectly grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, and warm bread. It looked less like dinner and more like an apology waiting to be rejected. "Does he usually eat alone?" I asked the chef. The older man forced a tired smile. "When he eats at all." Before I could answer, a housemaid hurried into the kitchen carrying the untouched dinner tray from the previous evening. Every plate was exactly as it had left the stove. The soup had never been tasted. The bread remained unbroken. The chef lowered his head without saying a word and quietly began preparing another meal from scratch. "He skipped dinner again yesterday?" I asked softly. "And breakfast," the chef admitted. "Sometimes lunch too." Something tightened inside my chest. I thought about my mother reminding me that people who stopped caring for themselves were often carrying burdens no one else could see. Just then, measured footsteps echoed above us. Every employee instinctively straightened. Vincent Romano descended the staircase wearing a black dress shirt with the sleeves neatly rolled to his forearms. He was taller than I expected, composed, clean-shaven, and strikingly handsome despite the deep shadows beneath his blue-gray eyes. He never raised his voice. He simply glanced toward the dining room before quietly asking, "Who changed the seating arrangement?" The room fell completely silent. No one answered. He studied the table for another second, then adjusted a single chair by less than an inch. "Details matter," he said calmly. "Please remember that." Without another word, he turned toward his office instead of the dining room, leaving the untouched dinner behind once again. I watched him disappear down the hallway while everyone slowly exhaled in relief. The chef reached for the tray, preparing to throw another untouched meal away. Before he could, I heard my own voice break the silence. "Please wait," I said. "Food deserves a second chance. Maybe people do too." I carried the dinner tray myself. The chef tried to stop me twice before finally surrendering with a worried sigh. "Miss Carter," he whispered, "everyone who has tried to convince Mr. Romano to eat has failed." I smiled as I adjusted the bowl of soup so it would not spill. "Then maybe no one has tried the right way." His expression suggested I had just volunteered to walk into a thunderstorm carrying an umbrella made of paper. The hallway leading to Vincent's office was quieter than the rest of the mansion. Warm light spilled beneath the heavy walnut door, while the grandfather clock at the end of the corridor counted each passing second. I raised my hand and knocked gently. No answer. I waited another moment before knocking again. A calm voice finally came from inside. "Come in." The office was nothing like I expected. Instead of extravagant decorations, I found floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, neatly organized files, a crackling fireplace, and a massive desk overlooking the dark river beyond the windows. Vincent stood beside the glass with his hands resting in his pockets, staring at the reflection of city lights dancing across the water. He did not turn around immediately. "I asked not to be disturbed during business hours," he said evenly. "I know," I answered, carefully setting the tray on a nearby table. "But your dinner was getting cold." He finally looked at me. His blue-gray eyes carried more exhaustion than anger. "You must be the new maid, Emily Carter. I did not request dinner. Your kitchen prepared it anyway." His gaze shifted toward the tray before returning to me. "Take it away." I folded my hands in front of my apron and quietly shook my head. No, the word escaped my mouth before I had time to reconsider it. Silence settled over the room. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed another minute. Vincent studied me with calm disbelief, as though he could not remember the last time someone working for him had refused an instruction. "Do you understand who I am?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "You are the owner of this house. Then you understand why you should listen." I nodded. "And you should eat." For the first time, something unexpected crossed his face. It was not anger. It was confusion. I gently lifted the warm bowl of tomato soup and placed it within his reach. "Being angry does not count as dinner," I said softly. "Neither does working until midnight." His eyes remained fixed on mine. I could hear my own heartbeat, but I never looked away. After several long seconds, Vincent glanced down at the bowl, picked up the spoon without a single word, and tasted the soup. Somewhere beyond the office door, I heard someone quietly drop a stack of folded towels in complete astonishment. The next morning the mansion felt different, although no one could explain why. The sunlight pouring through the tall windows seemed warmer, and the silence no longer carried the same weight. As I dusted the bookshelves in the main library, I noticed the staff exchanging quiet glances whenever they passed me. Finally, the chef approached, lowering his voice as though he were about to share a dangerous secret. "He finished the soup," he whispered. I smiled without looking up from the shelf. "That is good." The chef blinked. "That is all you have to say?" I shrugged gently. He was hungry. The older man laughed for what sounded like the first time in years. "Miss Carter, everyone here has spent months trying to convince him to eat. You walked into his office on your first day." I placed another book back in perfect alignment before answering. "Maybe everyone was trying to win an argument." He looked puzzled. "I was only trying to feed a person." Those words stayed with me throughout the day. While polishing the grand staircase railing, I stopped to help one of the younger maids gather a basket of clean towels she had accidentally dropped. In the kitchen, I quietly helped the pastry chef decorate desserts before returning to my own duties. Outside, I spent a few extra minutes watering flowers that had begun to wilt beneath the late summer sun. No one asked me to do any of it. It simply felt wrong to walk past someone who needed a hand. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the estate had softened in small, almost invisible ways. Someone hummed while preparing dinner. Two gardeners paused long enough to admire the roses blooming along the stone path. Even the butler greeted the delivery driver with an easy smile instead of his usual tired expression. As I carried freshly folded linens upstairs, Vincent stepped out of his office unexpectedly. I stopped immediately. So did everyone else in the hallway. He looked from me to the stack of towels in my arms before quietly asking, "Have you finished your assigned work?" "Yes," I answered. "Then why are you still working?" The question surprised me. I glanced toward the elderly housekeeper arranging flowers several doors away. Because she looked tired. Vincent followed my gaze. He remained silent for several seconds before giving one small nod. "Very well." He continued down the hallway without another word. The moment he disappeared around the corner, the butler slowly released a breath he had clearly been holding. "In all my years here," he murmured with quiet amazement, "that is the first conversation I have ever witnessed that ended with everyone feeling lighter instead of heavier." I watched Vincent's distant silhouette disappear beyond the staircase and realized something unexpected. I had not changed the man. Not yet. But perhaps I had reminded the house that kindness could still echo louder than fear. 3 nights passed before I realized the mansion had begun making sounds I had never heard on my first day. The kitchen filled with quiet conversations before sunrise. Someone laughed softly while arranging fresh fruit in the breakfast room. Even the old clock in the entrance hall seemed less lonely now that people no longer hurried past it with their heads lowered. I told myself the change had nothing to do with me. Houses changed because people decided to change inside them. That morning I carried fresh towels to the second floor and noticed a thin line of light beneath Vincent's office door. It was barely 6:30. I knocked gently before leaving a fresh pot of coffee outside. I had no intention of disturbing him. As I turned to leave, his voice reached me through the heavy wood. "Miss Carter." I stopped and looked back. "Yes, Mr. Romano. Come in." I stepped inside and immediately noticed the untouched fireplace, stacks of neatly organized documents, and a city skyline slowly waking beyond the windows. Vincent stood beside his desk wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. His tie rested across the chair behind him, forgotten. He looked as though he had not slept. Dark circles remained beneath his eyes despite the calm expression he always carried. "Did you need something?" I asked. His eyes shifted briefly toward the coffee pot in my hands. "You remembered." I smiled. "You worked late again." Instead of denying it, he quietly poured himself a cup. The rich aroma filled the room. "How did you know?" he asked. "The library light was still on when I checked the windows before bed." He looked at the coffee for several seconds before speaking again. "You notice more than most people." "Only because no one noticed me for a long time," I answered honestly. The room grew quiet. There was no awkwardness in the silence, only understanding. My eyes wandered toward a framed photograph resting beside a bookshelf. It showed a younger Vincent standing beside an older couple, all three smiling beneath bright summer sunlight. It was the first photograph I had seen anywhere in the mansion. He noticed where I was looking and gently turned the frame face down without saying a word. I did not ask about it. Some memories deserve permission before questions. Instead, I picked up the empty breakfast tray that had been sitting untouched on a nearby table. "Would you let me bring you something fresh?" I asked. "You have another busy day." Vincent looked at me with an expression I still could not fully understand. "You always ask," he said quietly. "Everyone else assumes." I nodded once. "Because people are not projects to manage. They are choices to respect." For the first time since I had arrived at the Romano estate, the corners of his mouth lifted into the faintest smile. It lasted only a heartbeat before disappearing again, but it was enough. When I carried the empty tray back downstairs, the butler looked at my face, then toward the office door, and whispered in complete disbelief, "Was that a smile?" By the end of my second week, I had learned something no one had ever bothered to tell me. Vincent Romano was never angry in the morning. His silence belonged to sunrise. His restlessness belonged to the afternoon. But his loneliness always arrived after midnight. I discovered it by accident. I had finished folding the last basket of laundry when I noticed a faint light glowing beneath the library door. The rest of the mansion had already fallen asleep. Outside, Moonlight stretched across the Hudson River like silver glass. I quietly walked past the doorway, expecting to see another meeting or another mountain of paperwork. Instead, Vincent sat alone in a leather chair with an unopened book resting on his lap. The fireplace burned low beside him, but he was not reading. He was simply staring into the flames as though they were telling a story only he could hear. I started to walk away without making a sound. "You are awake later than everyone else," he said without looking up. I stopped in the doorway. "So are you." A faint smile almost appeared before fading again. "Fair enough." I stepped inside, carrying the mug of warm herbal tea I had prepared for myself. "Would you like this instead?" I asked. "Too much coffee keeps people awake." He looked at the cup for a long moment before accepting it. "Thank you." We sat in silence while the fire cracked softly between us. It did not feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. My eyes wandered across the bookshelves until they stopped on a piano tucked into the corner of the room. A thin layer of dust rested across the keys. "Do you play?" I asked gently. Vincent followed my gaze. "I used to." "What made you stop?" He lowered his eyes to the steaming tea in his hands. Life became louder than music. I nodded without asking another question. Some answers carried enough weight on their own. After several quiet moments, I walked to the piano, picked up a soft cloth from a nearby cabinet, and carefully wiped the dust from the polished wood. I never touched a single key. I only cleaned it before placing the cloth back where I had found it. When I turned around, Vincent was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not gratitude. It was something quieter, something almost fragile. "You did not ask why I kept it," he said. I smiled softly. "Because I figured if you wanted me to know, you would tell me someday." His eyes remained on the piano before returning to mine. Most people try to fix what they do not understand. I adjusted the chair beneath the instrument and quietly headed toward the door. I am only here to dust what has been forgotten. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of a single piano key being pressed for the first time in years, and somehow that one quiet note filled the mansion with more hope than all the words either of us could have spoken. 2 months passed more quietly than I ever imagined possible. The mansion no longer felt like a place where people tiptoed around invisible storms. Fresh flowers appeared in the dining room every Monday. Music drifted softly through the kitchen while breakfast was prepared. Even the gardeners lingered long enough to admire the roses before returning to work. I told myself that people had simply remembered how to live again. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang while I was folding fresh linens in the laundry room. It was the hospital. My mother's doctor sounded happier than I had heard him in months. Her recovery had gone better than expected. She would finally be able to return home the following week. I leaned against the counter as relief washed over me so suddenly that tears blurred my vision. For the first time in nearly a year, I could breathe without carrying fear on my shoulders. That evening, I knocked gently on Vincent's office door. He looked up from a stack of documents the moment I entered. "Is everything all right?" he asked, noticing my expression immediately. I smiled through grateful tears. "Everything is finally all right." I explained my mother's recovery and how I wanted to return to my apartment so I could care for her again. As the words left my mouth, I realized how much the estate had quietly become part of my life. Vincent listened without interrupting. When I finished, he remained silent for several long moments before closing the folder in front of him. "She is fortunate to have you," he said softly. "I am the fortunate one." I tried to smile again. "I wanted to thank you before I left." His eyes settled on mine, calm as always, yet carrying a sadness he made no effort to hide. "When?" "Friday morning." He nodded once. "Then we have 3 more breakfasts to argue about whether I am eating enough." I laughed before I could stop myself, and to my surprise, he did too. It was quiet, brief, but completely genuine. Words spread through the mansion faster than I expected. The chef grew unusually quiet while preparing dinner. The butler polished the silver twice without needing to. Even the younger maids hugged me whenever they passed in the hallway. On Friday morning, my small suitcase rested beside the front door. The house looked exactly the same as the day I arrived, yet somehow everything felt different. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back toward the grand staircase. Vincent stood there in silence, one hand resting lightly on the banister. Neither of us spoke. We simply looked at one another across the entrance hall, and for the first time since I had walked through those doors, the mansion felt unbearably empty before I had even left. The first week back in my small apartment felt strangely unfamiliar. My mother was home at last, filling the tiny kitchen with the comforting smell of homemade chicken soup and humming old songs while folding laundry. It was everything I had prayed for during those long nights at the Romano estate. Yet every evening, when the sun disappeared behind the apartment buildings, I caught myself listening for footsteps that would never echo through our narrow hallway. My mother noticed before I did. One afternoon, she looked up from her knitting and smiled gently. "You keep staring at the window." I laughed softly. "Old habits." She tilted her head with the quiet wisdom only mothers seem to possess. "Or someone you miss." I tried to deny it, but the words never came. 3 days later, while watering the small flower box outside our apartment, someone knocked on the front door. I expected a neighbor. Instead, when I opened it, Vincent Romano stood quietly in the hallway wearing a simple navy overcoat, without a single bodyguard beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The powerful man who could command an entire estate looked almost uncertain, standing outside a modest apartment on the 3rd floor. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," he said with a small smile. "May I come in?" I stepped aside without thinking. My mother greeted him warmly before disappearing into the kitchen to prepare coffee, somehow treating the feared Mafia Boss exactly as she treated every other guest who entered her home. Vincent thanked her with genuine respect, then turned toward me. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. I looked at him in surprise. "For what?" He folded his hands together for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When you first arrived, I believed people stayed because they needed a paycheck." His eyes met mine with complete honesty. "You stayed because you cared about people. I should have recognized the difference sooner." I smiled. "You did eventually." He nodded. "Because you taught me to." Silence settled between us, comfortable and familiar. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and placed a folded envelope on the kitchen table. "This is not a job offer," he said before I could speak. "It is an invitation." I opened the envelope and found a handwritten note instead of a contract. It contained only one sentence. "I came to ask, not to command." I looked up at him as my mother quietly watched from the doorway with a knowing smile. Vincent took a slow breath before speaking again. "The house is peaceful now," he said, "but it has never truly felt like home since you left. I am not asking you to return as my maid, Emily. I am asking whether you would consider returning as someone whose place can never be measured by a job title." For several long seconds I could not answer. I simply looked at the handwritten note resting in my hands while the afternoon sunlight spilled across my mother's small kitchen. Nothing about Vincent's visit felt rehearsed. There were no promises of luxury, no grand speeches, no impossible gifts. Only a man who had finally learned the difference between asking someone to stay and giving them a reason to choose it. My mother quietly placed 3 cups of coffee on the table before smiling at both of us. "The best homes," she said gently, "are never built from stone. They are built from the people who make you feel safe enough to become yourself." She excused herself, leaving the two of us alone. Vincent looked almost embarrassed by the silence. "You do not have to answer today," he said. "I only wanted you to know that the door will always remain open." I folded the note carefully before placing it back inside the envelope. "Do you remember what you asked me on my first morning at the estate?" He searched my face before slowly nodding. "I asked why you kept working after finishing your responsibilities." I smiled. "And I told you that someone looked tired." He laughed softly. "You remember everything. Only the important things." We walked downstairs together, where the late afternoon breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves through the quiet neighborhood. Vincent stopped beside his car, but made no move to open the door. Months earlier, everyone had waited for his instructions. Now he simply waited for my choice. I looked at the familiar apartment building behind me, where my mother was finally healthy enough to begin living again. Then I looked toward the man standing beside me, no longer hiding behind authority or distance. "I cannot come back as your maid," I said. He nodded immediately. "I would never ask you to." I took one slow step closer. "But I would like to come back as Emily." His expression softened in a way I had never seen before. It was not the smile of a powerful man getting what he wanted. It was the quiet relief of someone finally believing he deserved happiness. Several weeks later, I returned to the Romano estate carrying nothing except a small overnight bag and a homemade apple pie my mother insisted I bring. The chef laughed when he saw it. The butler welcomed me with tears in his eyes. The gardeners waved from across the lawn. Inside the kitchen, breakfast was already waiting. Vincent stood beside the stove wearing a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, carefully trying to make pancakes while flour covered half the counter. He looked at me with an awkward smile and admitted, "I am still learning." I walked beside him, picked up the whisk, and laughed for the first time without carrying any sadness behind it. The mansion had once been known as the house where everyone feared the man inside. Now it had become the place where one ordinary woman reminded everyone that kindness could succeed where power never could. Looking back, I never accomplished the impossible. I simply treated one lonely heart like it was worth saving. And in the end, we both found the home we had been searching for all along.